Cleetus McFarland stood inside a NASCAR truck at Michigan International Speedway, microphone handed through the window, and said three things. Be like Biff, do it for Dale, and drivers, start your engines. 3 sentences, one name missing, and NASCAR Twitter exploded. What happened next was not just a debate about a grand marshal command. It became a full-blown controversy about respect, timing, legacy, and whether Cleetus McFarland belongs in NASCAR at all. And to understand why it hit so hard, you have to understand exactly what that moment was, who was watching, and what the sport had just gone through. Cleetus McFarland, real name Garrett Mitchell, was pulling double duty at Michigan International Speedway on June 6, 2026. He was not just competing in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series DQS Solutions and staffing 250. He was also serving as the Grand Marshal for the race, a combination that had never been done before at MS. The setup alone was unusual. When the moment came for the most famous words in motorsports, a microphone was handed through his window because Cleetus was already strapped into the number 4 Nice Motorsports Chevrolet, buckled up and ready to race. From inside the truck, he delivered the command. It was energetic. It was loud. It was exactly the kind of moment people expected from him. Ladies and gentlemen, I have just three things to say. Be like Biff. Do it for Dale. And drivers, start your engines. The crowd responded. The engines fired. And then, almost immediately, the conversation online started shifting. The Be Like Biff reference pointed to Greg Biffle, a retired NASCAR driver who had become one of Cleetus's closest friends. Biffle died tragically in a plane crash in December 2025, and the two had a growing relationship built around Cleetus's Florida racetrack, the Freedom Factory, where Biffle had become a regular competitor. Do It for Dale was a reference to Dale Earnhardt, who died in the 2001 Daytona 500 and has been a core part of Cleetus's racing identity for years. Both references made sense within his personal story. Both were genuine. But this was a Truck Series race, and it was happening just 16 days after NASCAR lost the greatest Truck Series driver who ever lived. Kyle Busch died on May 20th, 2026. He was 41 years old. His death, caused by severe pneumonia that progressed into sepsis, sent shockwaves through the entire motorsports world. He was a 2-time NASCAR Cup Series champion, winning titles in 2015 and 2019. He won 63 Cup Series races, ranking 9th on the all-time list. But in the Craftsman Truck Series specifically, his record was untouchable. 69 wins, the most in the history of the division. He was the winningest Truck Series driver of all time. And Cleetus McFarland was sitting in a Truck Series vehicle, giving the command to start engines, and did not say his name. For a significant portion of NASCAR fans, that omission was impossible to ignore. The reaction on X was immediate and in many cases brutal. One fan wrote, "What about Kyle Busch?" Another said, "Rude to leave out Kyle." A third was far less diplomatic. "Kinda forgot someone. You giant douchebag." Someone else wrote, "Thanks for remembering my hero, Kyle Busch, you dip." One user asked directly, "Does Cleetus have something against Kyle Busch? He's the winningest truck driver and you don't recognize him while you're sitting in a truck. Weird." Another added, "Dude didn't even acknowledge Kyle Busch, this content creator." And one more wrote, "It sat with me wrong knowing he left Kyle Busch out." The anger was sharp and widespread, but it did not stop there. A second layer of backlash emerged that was not even specifically about Kyle Busch. It was about Cleetus himself. Some fans had simply grown tired of the attention NASCAR was giving him. "I've never seen a backmarker get this much attention," one user wrote. Another said bluntly, "Okay, enough of Cleetus, move on." Within hours, the story had shifted from one misname to a full debate about whether NASCAR was handing too much platform to a YouTube star who had at that point 1 Truck Series start under his belt. But not everyone agreed. A portion of the fan base pushed back on the outrage, and their argument was worth hearing. One user responded, "This is such a weird thing to get mad about. Cleetus had no connection to Kyle. Dale was an inspiration to him, and Biffle was his close friend. He doesn't have to talk about everybody." Another fan was more pointed. "So-called NASCAR fans mad because Cleetus is bringing fanfare and an audience to an otherwise dead Truck Series that nobody watches. You should be thankful." A third supporter put it simply, "We all miss Kyle, but he doesn't need to be mentioned in everything." And there was one detail that many critics missed entirely. Cleetus McFarland actually did honor Kyle Busch at Michigan. He ran a no. 8 decal on his truck, a direct reference to the number Kyle wore at Richard Childress Racing. It was not announced loudly. It was not part of a press release, but it was there. That fact alone complicates the narrative that he was deliberately ignoring Kyle Busch's legacy. So where does that leave the controversy? The honest answer is that this is two separate conversations that people kept combining into one. The first conversation is about intent. Cleetus's command was built around his own racing influences, the people who shaped him personally. Greg Biffle was a close friend who died months earlier. Dale Earnhardt has been part of his brand since the beginning. He was not constructing a tribute on behalf of the entire sport. He was delivering a grand marshal command the way he has always framed his racing. Identity. There is no verified evidence that he was deliberately leaving Kyle Busch out. The second conversation is about timing, and this is where the criticism has more weight. Kyle Busch's death came on May 21, 2026. The Michigan Truck race was June 6, 2026, just 16 days later. The grief was still fresh across the entire NASCAR fanbase. The Truck Series specifically was the division where Kyle held every major record. For Cleetus to stand in that environment and not acknowledge him, even briefly, even with just the word Rowdy, was a missed moment. A single mention would almost certainly have stopped the backlash before it started. That does not make the omission malicious, but it does make it costly. This is what happens when a crossover name enters a sport that takes its traditions and its losses seriously. Every action gets examined, every move gets magnified. When Cleetus spins, critics say he does not belong. When he is given the Grand Marshal role, critics say NASCAR is forcing him on the audience. When he does not mention Kyle Busch, critics call it disrespect. That is not necessarily fair, but it is the reality of being famous before you are proven in a sport as identity-driven as NASCAR. Then the race happened, and whatever was said about the command, what Cleetus did on the track that afternoon told a different story about where he is in his development. He started 29th and finished 25th on the lead lap after a late race spin. On paper, that does not look impressive. In context, it was a significant step forward. His only previous Craftsman Truck Series start came at Daytona, where he crashed out after just 5 laps and finished 37th. At Michigan, he spun, but he did not end the race in the garage. He kept going, completed the event, and gained the seat time he needed. The race itself was a strong one. Corey Heim, driving the #1 Tricon Garage Toyota, won the DQS Solutions and staffing 250 by just .065 seconds over his teammate Caden Honeycutt in a dramatic finish. Carson Hostvar led a race-high 65 laps for Spire Motorsports and looked like the strongest truck all afternoon, but faded late after dealing with overheating issues. Chandler Smith and Lane Riggs rounded out the top 5, with Riggs holding on to the championship lead by 26 points over Honeycutt. For the race winner, it was a historic result. It was Heim's 26th career victory and his first ever at Michigan, giving him series wins now at 22 different tracks, second best all-time behind only NASCAR Hall of Famer Ron Hornaday Jr., who won at 31 venues. It was also his 3rd win in just 5 truck starts this season. After the race, Cleetus spoke honestly about what the day meant for him. Man, learned a ton. Corey Heim won. I basically got second obviously, because I finished and I'm now 50% on my truck races. He knew the joke. He also knew the point behind it was real. He finally finished a Craftsman Truck Series race. The biggest lesson from Michigan, in his own words, came down to understanding the truck's behavior at speed. The things that I really learned was driving the truck sideways a little bit. Obviously, I did have one mishap, but so many laps I'm sideways, right? But these trucks have such a big wing and so much side force. When a truck steps out, you can really keep driving through it. That is the exact opposite of what happened at Daytona, where the truck stepped out and he overcorrected, instantly, snapping into the wall. He connected the two moments directly. I think back to Daytona when I wrecked. The truck stepped out and I just was like, oh, and turned down the track and wham. Now I know the limits and I feel so much better about Talladega. On the Michigan spin specifically, he did not deflect. I went in too fast and I had dirty air and I just knew I was at the mercy of the slide. I actually caught it and then I lost it. No excuses. No finger pointing, just accountability and a clear-eyed read of what happened. He closed his post-race comments with a line that captured exactly where his head was. The whole day was a huge learning experience. Finishing was enough for me. His next confirmed NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series start is expected to be Talladega later this season, a high-speed, drafting environment where his ARCA Menard Series experience already includes a runner-up finish after leading 19 of 76 laps. Cleetus McFarland is bringing new fans, new energy, and a completely different audience into NASCAR. That is not a debatable point. His 4. 75 million YouTube subscribers and roughly 10 million followers across social media represent real reach into communities that were not watching Truck Series racing before he showed up. The command went viral. The backlash hit hard. The race showed genuine progress from a driver still learning one of the most physically demanding environments in motorsports. The question is a real one. Did Cleetus McFarland disrespect Kyle Busch, or did fans expect too much from someone who never once claimed to be a NASCAR insider? Drop your answer in the comments.